A Lady and Her Husband by Amber Reeves. Chapter 3. During the next fortnight, Mrs. Heyham's sitting room took on a business-like air. A desk appeared in it, a typewriter, and finally a lady called Miss Percival. She was Rosemary's idea, and the theory of her was that one cannot be certain of doing good, even to waitresses, unless one knows something about them before one begins. Miss Percival, who had been secretary to a philanthropic member of Parliament, was to help her employer acquire this necessary knowledge, and then act, so to speak, as a reservoir of information whose tap would be turned if Mrs. Heyham showed signs of forgetfulness or of letting her feelings run away with her. There could be no doubt of the lady's fitness for this task, for away in her past behind the conscientious member lay services to every progressive society in London that wanted investigation done for nothing. And if testimonials can be trusted, each of these bodies had relinquished Miss Percival with passionate regret. Mary waited with such efficiency with certain misgivings. Her kind heart had prompted her to buy a fumed oak desk instead of the elegant sycamore she would have liked, in order that her secretary might feel at home. Anything so ugly must, Mary thought, be excessively practical. But when Miss Percival arrived, she did not look like a person who would be affected by the material of her desk. She was short, dark, unexpectedly young, and quite kind to everyone. She even informed Mrs. Heyham that this was the sort of work she had been hoping to get. The only other thing one noticed about her, at first, was that she would not speak, if she could help it, in front of James or Trent. Mary, when she saw that this was so, felt sorry for her and almost suspected sad experiences. The MP was out of the question. Mary had once sat next to him at dinner, but she had no such guarantee about all the queer people there must have been in the societies. But kindness might be trusted to remove any doubts that lingered in Miss Percival's mind, and in the meantime the important thing was that she seemed to have a clear notion of what she meant to do. This was a relief to Mary, who could organize very well when she must, but took no delight in thinking out a plan for its own sake. The first thing, according to the expert's scheme, was to ask Mr. Heyham to give them an account of the business. This he willingly did, at ease in his armchair, while Mary looked at him with quiet appreciation. Miss Percival was not present. James, when he told a story, liked to tell it in his own way, and in this case Mary's dead father and mother were involved, besides James's own father, who was intensely alive and sinful in South America. Mary could repeat the important facts to Miss Percival afterwards, and then Miss Percival could make a note of them. The business came into the family in the middle age of James's father, who in those days was a plausible, restless fellow, continually initiating enterprises and continually throwing them up. At this period in his career, he was associated with a dubiously virtuous old man called Matthew Clarkson, and Clarkson persuaded his ally to invest some money they had recently acquired in a mineral water factory in East London. It was called the Rule Britannia Aerated Water Company, and that, as its vendor pointed out, was a very good name to start from. The factory, as they found it, was small and exceedingly dirty, and perhaps for these reasons congenial to Matthew, who developed a habit of visiting the place very morning in order that he might irritate the foreman and conduct experiments in an unpleasant cupboard that he called his laboratory. Meanwhile, Mr. Henry Heyham was making the most of this brief life, spending a good deal of the mysterious money, moving into a larger house, giving his sons a passable education, and looking about him for a suitable match for his daughter Edith. Even her brothers thought Edith a handsome girl, and in particular she was attractively plump. Henry found it possible before his own financial needs became too glaring to marry her to a wealthy gentleman interested in meat. And thank heaven this is a Christian country where marriage is still held sacred. He bore up until the honeymoon was over, for he always liked to do things decently. But 2 days after Edith's return he summoned his second son James, fresh from a London school, and told him, with an almost tearful impressiveness, that he, Henry, was for the moment done for. Honourably done for, mind you, not through his own fault, but through the fault of those he had trusted. Not that he regretted having trusted them. He would rather have a mind full of faith and confidence in his fellows, even if he had to pay for it, than pass through the world crammed with ugly suspicions and for ever taking precautions against his neighbour. Even without the old man's deprecating look, James would have understood that this was Henry's way of apologizing for some gross and culminating piece of carelessness. But that was not all he had to say. Many fathers, if not most fathers, when they had reached the age of having grown-up sons, who had been treated with every kindness, supplied with every luxury, and equipped with an unsurpassed education, would consider, and in his opinion they wouldn't go beyond their rights if they did, that the time had come when the said sons were in duty bound to turn to and support the authors of their being. But he, Henry, was not that sort of man. He would never be a burden on any child of his. On the contrary, it had been the object of his steadfast endeavour to provide a safe start in life for his boys, no matter what might happen to their old father. Edith couldn't have been better disposed of. Timothy was doing well with the smartest, most up-to-date solicitors in London, and he now proposed to complete the beneficent work by giving James an opportunity that most young fellows would cut off their ears to get, an opportunity so resplendent, if he only liked to use it, that 10 years might see him a rich man, and 20 find him a captain of industry. And this in an age when to be a captain of industry, honest British industry, was the goal of every decent man's ambition. There was much that might be said upon the subject, upon the essential meanness and hollowness of politics, art, literature, the church, the services, science, medicine, and teaching, regarded as careers. But time pressed. He would put what he wanted to say briefly, simply, without trimmings, as befitted a businessman. He proposed to make over to his dear son James his share in the thriving mineral water business known as the Rule Britannia Aerated Water Company, and to whatever quarter of the globe fortune might drive him, to whatever depths of squalor she might plunge him, he would never forget to pray for the immediate, the triumphant, the cataclysmic success of his dear son, his old friend, and the Rule Britannia. James had not known that there was such happiness. He could not speak. His eyes were dazzled by a vision of shining bottles, thousands of smooth glass bottles, crystal clear, through which gleamed splendidly the ruby, the topaz, the diamond of the appetizing contents. Above waved the flag of the greatest of nations, and the distant voices singing a glorious song broke off to acclaim him a captain of industry. His heart was full. For a moment he forgot his anxiety concerning the fate of a parent. Old Henry, who had only paused for dramatic effect, felt no pain at this lack of piety. Let James rejoice, he went on, and not sadden his days by thinking about him. He had knocked about the world before now, and if a peaceful old age was denied him, he would submit anew to the scourgings of fate. As a matter of fact, here his eye brightened. He had heard of a little affair in South America. There might be something in it, or there might not. In any case, no good would be served by talking about it now. If matters went well with his boys, would hear from him. If not, he hoped they would keep a warm corner in their hearts for the memory of their poor old father. And now James had better come along and see to the necessary papers, as he was sailing from Montevideo in a couple of days. When When next his voice did hear of him, 2 years later, he was lodged in a South American prison. James, who had long feared something of the sort, could only be thankful that it had happened in a romantic continent. None of Henry's family doubted that when Henry returned, if he ever did return, he would have some explanation compatible with the greatest physical courage and the loftiest qualities of heart and head. As a matter of fact, when a letter arrived, it contained the tale of a maiden in distress so beautiful, so tender, so virtuous, that only a scoundrel could have turned away from her piteous appeals. Meanwhile, James worked hard, but the captain of industry still dominated his dreams. But it was some time before he began to make more than a bare living. Even when he had, to a certain extent, surmounted his own inexperience, he was faced by his partner's refusal to spend a penny on making the factory even decently clean, by the impossibility of keeping a good glass of work-girl owing to the same old gentleman's roving eye, and by Clarkson's ginger cordial. This was the result of years of patient and muddled investigation on Matthew's part. He was not satisfied with it yet, he said, and meanwhile he was offended if he was not allowed to call the whole staff away from their work in order that they might conduct experiments with him. This was particularly troublesome because the coadjutor he most favoured was the forewoman, the only person in the place whose tongue was sharp enough to keep the girls in order. It was useless for James to explain that no business carried on in this way could have any chance of succeeding. Clarkson replied that it didn't matter a damn whether it succeeded or not until the ginger cordial was ready for the market. After that event, it wouldn't be able to help succeeding. And further, he wasn't going to be preached at his own factory by young puppies. That seemed an impregnable position, but Matthew's defences had one weak spot. The passing of the Employers' Liability Act revealed the fact that the senior partner was terrified of inspectors and of the fiendish things inspectors might do to him. He had no knowledge of the law, and only a vivid something in his past seemed adequate to account for his fear of it. Happily in this country we have, besides the clumsy and the public affairs of our legislators, the subtle and intricate machinery of Home Office orders. One Julius Trent, a friend of James's, persuaded him to spend a few pounds at a costumier's and a few shillings at a printer's. After that, one of Her Majesty's factory inspectors in an imposing blue uniform visited Mr. Clarkson several times a week. The old man withstood this onslaught for some time, but when the inspector arrived one day with a printed document which set forth that owing to information and complaints recently received, regulations had been issued to the effect that those who were guilty of any breaches of the rules laid down for the safety and good government of the English people, and in particular of obstructing or using obscene or filthy language to Her Majesty's factory inspectors in the course of their duty, should in future be liable to imprisonment with hard labour without the option of a fine, the old man's courage failed. He undertook to allow the necessary cleaning. He promised to respect a salutary rule just made by the Home Secretary that no foreman was on any account whatever to enter her employer's private room. He even gave up his laboratory because the same authority had found it inexpedient to permit experimental research into the composition of cordials to be carried on under one roof with the manufacture of mineral waters between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. He retired, routed to a shed at the bottom of his garden with no revenge but his words, and the next thing to do was to buy him out before he discovered what had happened. That took some time, partly because every penny James could spare was needed for repairs and improvements, partly because Mr. Clarkson, as soon as he found that James wished it, showed an obstinate reluctance to being bought out. The Home Secretary could not exclude him from his own premises altogether, and he still enjoyed an occasional ramble round. Finally, James, who was growing more masterful, dismissed the four women. That was a blow, for a successor and a successor's underlings did not appreciate Mr. Clarkson's practised smiles. James found him one day examining himself rather sadly in a looking-glass. The sight of James's reflected face suddenly mingled with an already unpleasing picture crossed Mr. Clarkson. Hitherto, he said, he had borne with young Heyham's goings-on in a Christian spirit, but this was spying. Heyham seemed to think that he was cock of the walk, that he would only got to say the word and everyone would lick his boots. Well, they wouldn't. And when Matt Clarkson, liked to be nasty, he would be nasty, and no mistake about it. Being nasty meant abusing James in front of the hands, jeering at him, or what was worse, assuming in public that nothing delighted him more than to hear one of Mr. Clarkson's appalling anecdotes. Even the Home Secretary cannot forbid a Briton to make the jokes that please him. Nevertheless, in his heart, the old man was afraid. He did not attempt to control the business, and when he had made his partner really angry, he would say that he didn't mean anything by it. It was just his way. Meanwhile, James had arrived at a time of his life that he could discuss more fittingly with a wife on the sofa beside him than with a wife on a separate chair. Julius Trent, afterwards such a nuisance, then so charming, introduced his friend James to his parents, and old Mr. Trent took a fancy to the young man. Old Mr. Trent approved of young men who worked very hard and showed every intention of succeeding, and he had been amused by Julius's account of Mr. Clarkson and the factory inspector. He also enjoyed discussing books with James, for in those days James took an interest in political theory. He hadn't much time to think of these things himself, but there were plenty of men who had, and surely some day one of them would produce a simple, gentlemanly, inexpensive solution of social problems that would relieve an overworked businessman of further anxiety. Old Mr. Trent, like many people who have few chances of talking over the subjects that interest them, had invented 2 or 3 systems that would abolish bad times and make England prosperous forevermore. The trouble with most of them was that they involved a good deal of compulsion at the outset, before people had learned to appreciate their excellence, and Mr. Trent was against compulsion in any form. It was this that had made him give up his great Malthusian scheme of grading workmen according to their capacity and regulating their families in a corresponding manner. He still hoped that a more enlightened generation might adopt it of their own free will, and to this end he subscribed considerable sums to a neo-Malthusian journal. But the plan to which he had finally devoted his declining years might perfectly well, if only the government would leave off wasting their time, be put into effect at once. It consisted in taking 1/10 of the capital of anybody who had got a sufficient quantity, buying gold with it, and depositing the gold in the vaults of the Bank of England. It would not be at all an oppressive measure, but the resulting prosperity and expansion of credit would far more than compensate everybody concerned. After only 2 or 3 years, he was sure that no more compulsion would be necessary, for here you would be dealing not with uneducated workmen, blind to their own interests, but with astute financiers and men of business. The only difficulty would be that other countries might get hold of the idea and refuse to sell gold. But let his hearers take heart. Recent discoveries all went to show that there was a far greater quantity of gold in various parts of the planet, mostly by the direct favour of God, British possessions, than one was apt to imagine. If James could glance at these geological maps. James was not always alert by these problems, but he appreciated Mr. Trent's library and the comfortable, sufficiently cultured air of Mr. Trent's house. The manners that prevailed in it seemed to James very gracious and elegant. They were in any case a pleasant change from the manners of Mr. Clarkson. He also grew fond of Mrs. Trent, who was kind to him, and he fell in love with whatever her mother and her governess allowed him to see of Mary. She was 16 when he saw her first, very pretty, very quiet, very easily made to blush. She would laugh delightfully, as if she could not help it, at the clever, witty things James said, and then stop suddenly and droop her head over her embroidery until James surpassed himself to make her look up again. They were engaged when she was 18, and at the end of another year he felt that he was in a position to marry her. Mr. and Mrs. Trent believed in girls marrying young, while they would still view facts in a romantic light and before they had become unable to adapt their dispositions to those of their husbands. James' only regret was that he could not present himself as the sole owner of his growing business, but old Clarkson persistently demanded not only £3,000 for what had only cost him 1,500, but an extra 500 for the formula of his ginger cordial. Nobody wanted his cordial, but he would not sell one without the other. That he would sell at all was due to the fact that James was still bent on developing the business instead of considering all the returns as profit. Neither James nor Mary was ever sure of the motives that led Mr. Trent to make his daughter part owner of the Royal Britannia, but they believed that the idea must have occurred to him first on the day when he met Mr. Clarkson in James's office. The senior partner's clothes were particularly greasy that day. He had been drinking a good deal of ginger cordial with a little rum in it to make it more satisfying, and he insisted on showing the visitor some picture postcards that he considered truly comic. Mr. Trent was a fastidious little man, and as an estate agent he had come into contact with some very good people. He asked James at the time whether he ever saw Mr. Clarkson outside the factory, and James's reply of, "Not if I can help it," may not have seemed sufficiently reassuring. At any rate, when James came to sign his marriage settlements, he found that Mr. Clarkson had sold his share in the firm and his rights over Clarkson's ginger cordial for £3,500, the said rights to revert to him if the said cordial were ever sold under any other name, and that Mrs. James Heyham would in future be entitled to half the profits of the business. After his marriage, James worked harder than ever. Old Mr. Trent made an excellent father-in-law. He never interfered, but he was always ready to lend James 100 or so when mineral water provided some sudden opportunity for a rich man to become a little richer. James found considerable moral satisfaction in repaying these loans. Mrs. Trent was sympathetic, helpful when Trent and Laura were born, and an unfailing example to Mary of how a wife should cherish and revere a husband. The Heyhams lived frugally, for the firm was still absorbing every penny that could be spared. Bread companies and milk companies were beginning to make fortunes out of shops for the sale of tea and light refreshments. James did not see why a similar venture should not succeed with mineral water for its basis. The Royal Britannia was turned into a private company under the name of Imperial Refreshments Limited. Mr. Trent lent James the necessary capital and 3 tea shops were established. The tea shops flourished and their numbers grew. Before long, they were the most important part of the business. They did not provide the market for mineral waters that James had expected, but, though it seemed a little perverse of them, they were steady customers for the ginger cordial. This proved to be a heartening mixture, unnecessarily complicated perhaps, but undoubtedly with an interest of its own. In summer, it imparted life to our imperial fresh brewed drinks. In winter, hot, it made clients feel brisk but not aggressive. James hated the sight of it, and its smell gave him a headache. Now he still worked, still looked for opportunities, still kept an open mind, but it was with the ease and amplitude of recognized success. Worries came and went, Whether a government interfered with prices, this man or that turned out bad, neighborhoods altered, and rivals had bright ideas. But at the bottom the imperial was sound and everybody knew it. Its methods and its machinery alike were the most up-to-date in the trade. Its premises were spotless. The materials it put into its products were absolutely the best that could be done for the money. And James took trouble to please his customers' minds as well as their bodies. The tea shops had begun in a somewhat gloomy fashion. The glass doors between their windows had been darkened with large bills of fare, the upper with labels, and below a Japanese tea set on one side and some fruit and a boiled ham on the other had been thrown into relief by red plush curtains. Instead there had been bamboo furniture, black screens with gold birds on them, and an occasional artificial palm. But as James rose in the world, his taste improved. With the changes in Mary's furniture at home, the decorative scheme of the tea shops changed too. Until now, they were models of charm and sanitation. Their walls were white and their paint was black. Customers' hats and coats were masked in places where they did not destroy the effect. The tables had tops that were excellent imitations of green marble and as light as wood to shift, heavy wood. There were casement windows, and in winter the curtains and the crockery were cherry-coloured. In summer they were white with a border of green leaves. Trent thought this extravagant, but James preferred to consider the beneficial effect on the aesthetic natures of his customers. Besides, it pays in the long run to be distinctive. Even the company's monogram had been carefully designed to add to the beauty of these favoured places. In short, they looked like shops where you might well have paid sixpence for your cup of tea, and they were shops, as the posters by real artists reminded you, where you could get a superlative cup for 2 pence. The Imperial manufactured their own china under another name and held the patent rights of the marble substitute. In the newer shops, they were paving the floors with it, green and white. The fact that several other restaurants and tea shops came innocently to him for their cups and saucers gave James a good deal of quiet pleasure, though he didn't attend to that side of the business himself. Nor as the china factory was naturally not in London, would Mary be likely to have dealings with it, though they employed a good many girls. But he could assure her that go where she would, at any time, whether she was expected or not expected, she wouldn't find a corner of the Imperial's premises that she would be ashamed to see in her own house. James knew all about that, and he didn't believe in it.